Picture a car factory in Windsor, Ontario, a hub where vehicles are built for American driveways just across the border. This isn't just any factory, it's a symbol of how three neighboring countries, Canada, the United States and Mexico, have worked together for decades to build something bigger than themselves. Every day, thousands of workers clock in, knowing their efforts will ripple far beyond their own city. For decades, this factory has been part of a tightly woven North American supply chain. Engines from Mexico, transmissions from the US, final assembly in Canada. Each part of the car's journey tells a story of collaboration, with components crossing borders multiple times before the finished vehicle rolls off the line. It's a dance of logistics, expertise, and trust, perfected over generations. This system, built on free trade agreements like NAFTA, let each country focus on what it did best, creating jobs and affordable cars across the continent. The result? Cheaper vehicles for families, more choices in showrooms, and a sense of shared prosperity. It was a model of how open borders and economic cooperation could benefit millions. But by the early 2020s, the Washington saw this integration as a threat to American jobs, blaming it for factory closures in the Rust Belt. Headlines told stories of communities hollowed out and workers who felt left behind by globalization's promises. The new goal: bring auto jobs back to the US, even if it meant disrupting the entire system. Politicians promised a return to the glory days, vowing to put American workers first, no matter the cost to old alliances or established supply chains. Suddenly, the car became a symbol in a high-stakes economic battle: global efficiency versus national protectionism. The debate wasn't just about jobs, but about identity, pride, and the future of manufacturing in North America. The stage was set for a dramatic clash of philosophies, with the future of millions of workers hanging in the balance. Uncertainty spread through factory floors, as families wondered what tomorrow would bring. What happened next would show just how unpredictable economic engineering can be, and how the fate of three neighbors can be tied together in ways no one could have imagined. A tariff is a tax on imports, a fee charged by governments on goods brought in from other countries. It's one of the oldest tools in the policymaker's toolbox, dating back centuries, and it's still used today to shape the flow of global trade. Tariffs are a blunt instrument, designed to make foreign goods more expensive and less competitive compared to domestic products. By raising the price of imports, governments hope to protect local industries and encourage consumers to buy homegrown alternatives. The United States wielded this tool aggressively in 2023, zeroing in on the auto industry. The goal? To pressure global carmakers to shift their manufacturing operations to American soil, creating jobs and boosting the domestic economy. In 2025, the US government introduced a sweeping new 25% tariff on imported cars and trucks, replacing the old 2.5% rate. This dramatic increase was meant to make foreign vehicles far too costly for most American consumers, tilting the playing field in favor of domestic automakers. The logic behind this move was simple: if imports become pricier, more Americans will buy cars made at home. That means more sales for US factories, more production lines running, and more jobs for American workers. At least that's the theory, but the global economy isn't that simple. Today's supply chains are incredibly complex, with car parts crisscrossing borders multiple times before a vehicle is finished. Tariffs can disrupt these networks, raising costs not just for foreign companies, but for American businesses too. The US hoped to create a protected bubble for its auto industry, shielding it from foreign competition. But in reality, the shockwaves from these tariffs would soon ripple far beyond Washington, affecting workers, companies, and consumers around the world. Tariffs sound great in political speeches: simple, decisive, patriotic. But in practice, they're just one move in a much bigger, messier game of international trade, where every action triggers a reaction. The hammer had been swung, forceful, dramatic, and impossible to ignore. Now the world would feel the impact as industries scrambled to adapt to the new reality. The question loomed large: would this bold move revive American manufacturing, bringing prosperity and jobs back home? Or would it break the very system that American industry depends on, causing more harm than good? The answer was about to unfold, with consequences that would reach far beyond the auto industry and shape the future of global trade. Even before tariffs, the US rewrote the rules with the USMCA, replacing NAFTA. The New Deal forced automakers to use more North American parts, 75% instead of 62.5%, and required 40% of a car's value to be made by higher-wage workers. The aim: bring better jobs back to the continent and stop companies from importing cheap parts from Asia. But the rules were so complex and costly that many automakers simply paid the old 2.5% tariff instead of complying. By 2023, over 8% of vehicles from Canada and Mexico paid the duty, up from almost nothing. This wasn't what policymakers intended. Frustrated, the US raised tariffs to force compliance, making it too expensive to ignore the new rules. The message: play by America's rules or pay the price. But the industry was about to push back. The US strategy was clear: make America the only logical place to build cars for its market. High tariffs on imports and strict USMCA rules aimed to force automakers to invest in US factories and use American parts. Early wins, like Honda moving production from Mexico to the US, were celebrated as proof the plan was working. But this vision ignored the global nature of car manufacturing and underestimated how companies, and other countries, would respond. The US assumed its market power would force compliance, but the world had other plans. The fortress America tried to build was about to be tested. The next moves would reveal just how interconnected and unpredictable the auto industry had become. The game was far from over. The world didn't take US tariffs lying down. Almost immediately, the global response was swift and decisive, sending shockwaves through international markets and boardrooms alike. China and the EU hit back with their own tariffs on American cars, threatening US auto exports and jobs. These retaliatory measures were carefully targeted, designed to inflict maximum pressure on key American industries and regions. Canada and Mexico, deeply tied to the US market, announced countermeasures to protect their industries. Their leaders made it clear they would not stand by as their economies were put at risk. Suddenly, the North American market began to fracture, and the threat of a global trade war loomed. Investors grew nervous, and uncertainty rippled through financial markets, causing volatility and concern. Automakers, facing uncertainty and new barriers, started to rethink their strategies. Boardrooms buzzed with urgent meetings as companies scrambled to assess the risks and adapt to the new reality. The US was no longer a stable base for global exports. Retaliatory tariffs made it risky. Factories that once thrived on international demand now faced closures and layoffs. Companies began looking for new locations that offered both access to the US and global markets without the tariff chaos. The search for stability and opportunity became urgent. Canada, with its network of free trade agreements, emerged as a surprising alternative. Its open trade policies and skilled workforce made it an attractive destination for investment. The US had tried to force investment at home, but its actions pushed companies to look elsewhere. The unintended consequences of protectionism were becoming impossible to ignore. The boardrooms of the world's biggest automakers were now focused north of the border. Strategic plans shifted, and new partnerships began to form in Canada's growing auto sector. The unintended consequences of protectionism were just beginning to show. Protests erupted, and headlines warned of economic fallout as the industry struggled to adapt. The next chapter would belong to those who could adapt, innovators ready to seize new opportunities and redefine the future of the auto industry in a rapidly changing world. Canada seized the moment, positioning itself as the stable, globally connected alternative to the US. With free trade deals spanning Europe and the Pacific, Canada offered automakers tariff-free access to dozens of markets. Building cars in Ontario now meant reaching not just the US, but the world, without the risk of trade wars. Automakers value stability, and Canada's trade certainty became a powerful draw. The government sweetened the deal with incentives for electric vehicle and battery plants, aligning with US policy where it made sense. Canada wasn't just a back door to the US, it became a front door to global markets. As the US focused inward, Canada quietly attracted new investment and jobs. The tables had turned, and Canada was winning the long game. The US plan to reshore its auto industry backfired. Tariffs raised car prices for American consumers by up to $5,300 per vehicle, hurting demand and slowing the industry. Instead of a flood of new US factories, many automakers shifted investment to Canada and Mexico, where trade was more predictable. Canada, with its skilled workforce and clean energy, became a magnet for electric vehicle and battery plants. The US had tried to wall itself off, but ended up pushing jobs and investment to its neighbors. Ford's CEO warned this would devastate the US industry, and he was right. Canada emerged as the unexpected champion, securing long-term growth and jobs. The lesson: in a global economy, protectionism can turn competitors into winners. The US had set out to dominate, but ended up watching from the sidelines. The tariff backfire is a lesson for everyone. In a global economy, simple solutions rarely work. Workers, companies, and consumers all felt the impact. Job security, supply chains, and car prices are all tied to international policy. The USMCA faces a major review in 2026, with Canada and Mexico pushing to undo the most damaging US rules. If talks fail, the entire agreement could collapse, throwing the industry into chaos. Meanwhile, the shift to electric vehicles is reshaping the supply chain, and Canada is leading the way with its resources and trade advantages. The US now faces the challenge of catching up, hampered by its own trade policies. The future depends on renewed cooperation. North America is strongest when it works together. The attempt to go it alone raised costs and pushed investment away. The next era will be defined by whether the three nations can rebuild trust and play as a team.